Okay. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. Buckle up, because this is going to be something. I anticipate, at least on my part, lots of swearing today in this recording, and lots of good, passionate conversation. So anyway, Carol Garboden Murray is here today.
Hi, everyone.
And Mike Huber.
Hello.
Say hi, Mike. There we go. Okay, so let's just jump right in. Here's the quote we want to start with. And this is from Joy in Early Childhood Programs by Bev Boss, which was published in 1995, but I still use it constantly. And she says, we must protect the right of all children to have a hallelujah kind of childhood. And now we're going to talk about an article that does not describe a hallelujah kind of childhood. So we're going to talk about an article in the latest issue of Young Children. So it's the summer 2022 issue. The article is called Outdoor Recess Matters, Preventing and Reducing Children's Challenging Behavior on the Playground. And there are 6 authors that you're welcome to look up if you need to know more. So Carol, this all kind of started with you posting on your Illuminating Care page, if I'm remembering right, about using the language of recess in an early childhood program. So I'm going to ask you to sort of get us started, and I know we're going to go in all different directions, but we're going to start with this recess piece.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Yes, when I opened up Young Children this summer and saw Recess Matters, it caught me off guard. And I thought, well, this must be one of those articles for 1st and 2nd grade, because I know young children and early childhood does include going all the way up to grade 3, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought, who's using the word recess in early childhood? Because in my career, we've never referred to outdoor playtime as recess.
Mm-hmm.
And especially recently in the last 4 or 5 years, what great resources we've had to create outdoor classrooms and to be outside with kids and not to have that separation between indoor learning, classroom time, and outdoor time. It's all learning. So my first impulse was, what's going on here? Again, is this one of those examples of how we're borrowing language from the public school or from educational models for older children to talk about what's happening in our sort of special, unique period of life, this time of early childhood, where we don't want to separate play from care, play from learning, where the child is whole? And I had a strong reaction to using the word recess throughout this article. Even the beginning of the article is kind of making a rationale. We better be outside. We better be having recess. And I thought, well, that's a little patronizing. Of course, we know kids need to play,
yeah,
kids need to be outside. And then I thought, wow, I just couldn't recognize myself or my children or my profession in this article. And I posted it on Facebook because there is this really important conversation we're having right now about play and the definition of play, the continuum of play, the spectrum of play, guided play. I mean, where are we going with this? How are we defining play? This article seemed to me to be an example of co-opting play, and actually taking play away from children, which is quite ironic since it's about recess, but it's about playtime. It seemed like it was hunkering down on structure and rules.
Yeah, absolutely it was. Yeah, and it very early they cite, well, you know, the language using recess really, before I even read the article, bothered me because of what you've already talked about, Carol, how it's using school language. And I know that happens because we want to be respected. We want to have the same kinds of professional respect as a field. That's the reason that's often given. But I'm confident in enough in my understanding of what quote unquote learning looks like in early childhood and how development is different in birth to 5 than older, elementary school, so that I'm confident that I can articulate that. So it worries me that other folks don't like that there aren't more voices saying that we're not school.
I think there's something else going on though, right? And I think it comes in, they're talking about an inclusive childcare.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to children with different needs, that aren't as typical, that people go into immediately this therapy mindset. And I first want to say that therapy or therapeutic work with children has two basic directions, very similar to early childhood education. That one is compliance focused and one is regulation focused, right? How do we help the child regulate when they aren't regulated? Or how do we help them engage in something that they want to, but aren't physically able to, or aren't mentally able to without some assistance, without some support? And so that's, I think, what's happening here. It's the same, it's a parallel to our like play-based learning versus teacher-based learning, but it's this idea of like, well, that's all fine and good. Let the typical kids play. But these atypical kids, they're not going to know how to share a bike,
right?
Because they can't, solve a problem. They can't solve a conflict. If there's a social conflict, they aren't able to.
Or they don't know how to play, like just
or
that
they don't know how to
statement.
play. And therefore, what we do is we teach them to play. So we read books about what they should do. And it's like this total backwards idea that no, all children are children, and all children deserve what was Bev's quote?
A hallelujah kind of a
A
childhood.
hallelujah kind of childhood. And unfortunately, disabled children often get sort of put into this, oh, let's just have them learn. The episode we did with Emmy and Amanda
Yes.
autistic children, I think was that perfect example. Having the child sit at snack until they ask correctly for their cracker. Well, all the other children, it's like, well, this is what we do. Kids, they're still learning to, you ask with words, in this more polite form. So we just, we feed them. Feed children. Hungry child, feed them.
Revolutionary.
But with the autistic child with a therapist in the room, suddenly you couldn't, because their IEP or their learning goal was this real compliance-based thing. It wasn't a goal of helping the child learn. Sorry, I'm rambling. I know.
No, that's okay.
It won't happen again, I swear.
No, yeah. I just noticed that you changed your name to My Cuber instead of My Cuber. And so I started laughing. That's what shows up when I do a transcript of the podcast. So
yeah,
I told him I was going to start calling him that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But just that idea that the goal could have been helping a child state their needs.
Right.
Verbally or non-verbally.
And starting with the child, right? Starting with
the child,
the child, and this idea that the child has a direction, the child has a need to develop autonomy, to make a choice. So once you take choice out of the equation, once you take that personal freedom away, then we're really talking about a very different framework. And it doesn't seem like it's grounded in child development to me. It feels, again, like you said, Mike, it's grounded in schoolification, training, compliance.
Right.
And so our shift becomes so different. Our focus becomes so different. And I think for me, I also was a special ed teacher, and I'm so comfortable finding my role, right? Like sometimes I need to move closer. Sometimes I need to move away. Sometimes I need presence. My presence is powerful when children are trying to negotiate a conflict. Sometimes I need to put my hand on another child's hand, and sometimes, I have a role of fading in and out and being attuned to what the children need from me, instead of removing them from what they're doing and saying, okay, let's go in the classroom and have a lesson on how to play. And it's going to start by me demonstrating how to stand on a swing and how to sit on a swing. And then we'll give examples of what's safe behavior and not safe behavior. Yeah. I just was reading that lesson plan in this article thinking, where did this come from?
And with preschool children, we're going to role play safe and unsafe, or we're going to quiz. Like the whole thing was, it just felt really, really anti-child to me.
Yes.
And you know, a lot of the IEPs, while we're talking about that element of the article, a lot of the IEPs I've seen include some sort of advocacy, self-advocacy goal. But this whole article is, how do we take away their self-advocacy and replace it with compliance under the guise of self-regulation or whatever? And that, I think, is dangerous. When we, you know, they said build a relationship, because then children are more likely to cooperate. I mean, I get that you can influence a child that you have a good relationship with, but that's different than this sort of manipulator relationship.
Yeah,
so that
cooperation is
cooperation.
different than making a child afraid to be themselves.
Right.
Which is, you know, and I do want to make sure that we are talking about compliance-based therapies, not which this article is about.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of, you know, Greenspan's floor time and other therapies that are play-based and are child-centered.
Right.
But Carol, you used the word attunement, and I was just thinking of the way they talk about doing a survey, a play survey, and kids are going to check off these pictures of which things they like. And it's like, does that mean you can't watch children? I mean, to me, it was like the weather chart of
preschool curriculum
playgrounds, right? Of like, I mean, you could watch the kids, rather than having them fill out this chart. Just like you could have the kids go outside rather than decide what the weather's like.
It's almost like they said, oh, we have to involve parents and families in all of our interventions, so we're going to ask parents to help children do this survey.
Yeah.
And I just imagined all these ways that survey was going wrong. And
exactly.
It was like, this is not the conversation I would have with a family, and nor the conversation I would have with a child. And like you said, Mike, I would be sitting in the sandbox watching children play, right? And I couldn't assume that a child would have a favorite play activity. The child has just begun learning how to play. The child has just begun understanding how to pedal a bike or how to sit on a swing or how to dig a hole. The child is not going to have that. Not that the child doesn't know themselves and have a direction, but to be able to put language to a favorite, to rank play.
Right. Yeah, to rank things. And it's like, and we know the kids change every like 2 minutes of what, like whatever they're doing right now is their favorite thing.
Exactly. That's the point. That's
So for the folks who haven't seen it yet, the interest survey has it says, I like to play, and then there's pictures of a sandbox, 2 kids playing catch, a swing set, a trike, a seesaw, teeter-totter, and a climber slide thing, and a sad face and happy face under each for the child to choose which they like to play. And then the questions are, tell me what might frustrate your child when playing on the playground. Fuck, how?
Doing surveys like this.
Oh my God. And what strategies or materials might help your child calm down if they become upset on the playground? Parents with the best of intentions and the best knowledge of their child don't know that.
No.
And I mean, that's minute by minute with children in real life deciding what's frustrating or experiencing that. And this is absolutely just trying to play a game.
And giving out
being
a
being the
to a
teacher.
parent doesn't build the trust to actually get an honest conversation.
Absolutely.
Having an honest conversation would build the trust, and it would just come out of like, oh yeah, whenever we go to the playground on the weekend, they get frustrated when someone knocks over the sand mound they're making, or whatever.
But it said right in the article, this survey is designed to garner children's input. Teachers can use it to learn about children's interests and to plan highly engaging recess activities. No, watch the children, see where they play.
Yeah, I think as a mentor and an instructor in a college, if one of my students brought me that survey, I would say, no, we got to do this over. This is not what we're talking about when we talk about engagement with parents. And I think also, like Mike said, as a special ed teacher, I've been in those play groups, with toddlers and 3-year-olds. And I was facilitating the playroom with an occupational therapist. And we would have great conversations with families. And it would be like, you need to share. The parent, the mom or dad would say, you need to share.
Yeah.
Give that to him. Stop that. And then we would be able to say to the family, oh, actually, learning to say, that's mine. I'm not done with it. Give it back to me. Grabbing the toy is actually okay because the child needs to experience his autonomy before he learns to share. And that child, we can support, ways of playing together. And then we talk about parallel play. And then we talk about, all the wonderful, rich ways we have to look at play,
Yeah.
and the development of cooperation, that so many kids, cooperative, sophisticated cooperative turn taking and this masterful kind of play doesn't really happen until kids are 5 or 6.
Right.
They start to do it at 3, 4, and 5, but this is a long journey, right?
Mhm.
With cooperation.
Yeah. Sharing should never be an IEP goal.
No.
Yeah,
no,
sharing
no,
shouldn't be
no.
a goal of
No.
anything under the age of 8. Like,
Yeah.
we don't expect it of adults, so why would we expect it of kids?
Right.
It's just
Well,
like, that's a nice car you just bought.
I want it.
Yeah, can I just, I'm gonna give it back. I just want to drive, to whatever, just to the grocery store.
Share
and
your
back.
car, Mike. Come on. Share your car, Mike. You're making me very sad when you don't share your car.
It's true.
So part of the
go ahead.
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say part of the focus, it's recess and the language has already got us all fired up. But then the focus is, how do we stop misbehavior so that children will be engaged in learning? And the approach is very behaviorist, and the behaviors they describe are like getting in conflicts with others, and things like it. That's engagement. It's just uncomfortable for the adult to see that engagement.
So this week's episode of Teaching with the Body and Mind, why conflict is a good thing in the classroom.
Awesome.
Or whatever word you want to use. But I think Tom used classroom in the episode, but it was like, because that's how they learn to engage with each other.
Yeah.
It's like building a block building and never letting the kid make a wrong move so that it falls down. Like, nope, we can't let you build these blocks until we teach you. We need a wide base, make sure everything is put on, square and whatever, rack and plumb, and we'll go to the next block, and don't touch those blocks yet because you haven't learned it yet. We're going to do this. Now let's read a book about it. You see how they're building the building. They aren't just haphazardly putting these steel girders on. Okay. So before, it was like, no, we let them build. Well, actually, we could get a schema episode if we're not careful. First, they like knock them down and knock them down and knock them down, and then they worry about building. And the same thing is true socially. And this is just, it gives me the,
Yeah,
creeps.
I think you mentioned Betsy Evans, and I love her too. Like, I love her work. It's just,
What did you say about Betsy, Mike?
Oh, I pictured her reading this article and either banging her head against a tree or just crying in a pillow and muttering, my life's work, my life's work.
Sorry, Carol, go ahead.
Yes, no, I just say Betsy Evans, we are here, we are doing the work, we her work is founded on, like, the Dangar Trail and Lillian Katz and all our giants that say, that children are humans with full emotions, and we are expecting a lot of them at a really young age. To think about the complicated dynamic process of developing your language, developing your motor skills, developing your social understanding, and then being put in a room or a playground with 16 other children that are working on all this stuff at the same time. Just like Mike said, the conflict is the point of education. That's great. Oh, you both want the shovel at the same time. That's the point where we teach social skills, not going back to the classroom and reading a book about how to share.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll bring up stories from my center, or a story. Sorry, this isn't the Mike show, I suppose. But so the childcare center I work for is an inclusive childcare. So 30% of children have identified needs. We assume another 10% will get diagnosed within each year, because we're the preschool everyone goes to, or the childcare center everyone goes to after they get kicked out of other places. And our agency also has, so just down the hall is autism day treatment. So these are children with autism that need more supports. So it's generally, 1-to-1 ratio, maybe a 1-to-2 ratio. or 2-to-1 ratio. I always forget which way it goes.
Yeah.
And then there's children's mental health day treatment down the other hall. And so we share the hallways, and then on the playground, we just go out. There's no scheduled times. People are allowed to go out. Classrooms, whatever, are allowed to go out at any time. So there's lots of interaction between children who, the way we usually phrase it, oh, they're still learning to ask before they grab it out of your hands, or they use their body to tell you what they want, or things like that. And the kids just learn that there's these different ways of doing it. And then teachers, I do think it's important for adults to I talk about it as building bridges. If one child's thinking this, one child's thinking this, the adult's idea, so my idea of scaffolding isn't bringing one kid up, it's bringing both kids to the same level, right? So if this child isn't understanding what this nonverbal child is telling them with nonverbal cues, I can help them understand. I'm not getting the verbal child, okay, let's pull out your visuals and point to the picture that you want the toy. Sometimes that's helpful. And other times it's helping the other child understand how to listen with their eyes, right? What is this child telling you right now? And so the one story, I already told the story, I guess, but one of the ways that I've seen this happening, because we kind of went through a pandemic, maybe you did too, where you are. So we weren't on the playground together for 2 years. And a bunch of our staff were new, had never done this before. And it is not something you would do anywhere else. So suddenly all the kids are sharing the playground again. And the adults were like, what? But now, just a few months in, you see these stories where one typically developing child is watching another kid sort of trying to ride a bike. And first question he asks is, so does he still wear a diaper? And the adult was like, yes. Like, oh, so he's still learning to go potty.
Oh, good.
Is he learning to ride a bike? Yeah. This is one of the first times he's been out. Oh, he's doing really good. Right. And it did come from reading our social story. So that is a book, but the social story was just giving children that language. Oh, this person's still learning something that I already do. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not the 5-year-old who uses a diaper is not a baby. That 5-year-old is still learning to do this, and then there can be language around, they may never learn to do it or whatever, but we usually don't worry about that because the other child doesn't need to know if this is like something, and we often don't know, right? There's best guesses, but children always surprise you. So that's what the book teaches, is it helps give language. And part of it is then when you're in the real life situation, the adult uses that language. So all 3 programs read these books. And for the nonverbal kids, it's mostly for the adults to know, oh, that's the language I'll use when I'm out there. And then we, very Dan Gartrell influenced as well. The 2 rules in our classrooms are we take care of each other and we solve problems together. And then that's the language we use when something happens.
Yep. Yeah.
That's so great. And I think you just gave such great demonstrations of some really explicit learning, right? And explicit teaching. Like we are not saying that we don't need to sometimes use visuals. We don't need to have scripts ready. We don't need to be really thinking intentionally how we are going to create inclusive environments. It takes a lot of thought. It's not like, okay, everyone free play and everything will be fine. It does take a lot of thought and intention and teaching, but you're starting with respect for the child and respect for play and respect for childhood. You're starting with an understanding of human development. And then you're saying, here's what we can do to create a place where everyone can have a successful experience. And it's not starting by saying, don't do this, don't do that. So I love like your examples of social stories, and scripts, and especially like, how do we take care of each other and how do we solve problems together? Like, it's not rules, don't stand on the swing. That might become an agreement or a rule that children decide upon during the school year, but it might not be. Well,
that brings the other thing is that they want a big focus here is teaching them not to play in unsafe ways, I think is what they called it. But their examples are like going up the slide or
even like teaching, like, don't throw a ball a certain way. Like,
yeah.
you
So
throw a ball directly at the person who's trying to catch the ball. And I'm thinking, well, then again, there's an understanding of that's not really how 3 and 4 year olds play with balls.
Oh,
right.
Yeah, what was it? It
And-
was like no intentionally throwing it a different direction or something like
Yeah.
that. I'm like, what?
Yeah, and so they quoted at the very beginning a report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or a recommendation recommending that preschoolers engage in at least 60 minutes of structured and 60 minutes of unstructured physical activity each day, which already I didn't go look at the report, but I think
I quoted in my last book as well.
Did you?
So that is how it's worded.
Yeah.
But I talked about, well, structured simply means like, oh, this is a time we're outside on a playground.
Right.
That's structured.
Yeah.
For kids under the age of 6, or I would argue 8,
Yeah.
that's the structure.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like everything that they talk about here then is what they think this is this is unstructured play, but they're very much controlling every element of it, and including which direction we go up the slide, and seeing that as misbehavior when there's so much positive and good that could come from a child going up a slide. I remember
the great social interaction when one child wants to go down and one child wants to go
Yeah,
up. That
that's
you're
what I was
suddenly
gonna say.
avoiding. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Mike. Jesus.
But I do.
Anyway, yeah,
I think,
maybe
yeah.
you've heard this one before, but I remember very vividly one day 2 children going in opposite directions and watching the social interaction and this was when I was at the Purdue preschool clinic. The grad students were coming up concerned, and I was kind of stopping them from interfering. And then later we talked about, what did you see? And they talked about the negotiation and the language skills and the cooperation and the problem solving that those 2 did on their own without us stepping in. And I was like, which one of those things do you wish hadn't happened? Like which one of those would you like to keep them safe from?
That's why you get paid the big bucks. That question after it is great.
The big bucks, yes.
And
yeah,
I think
anyway,
Mike, you talked about what is structure. So like, how would you structure a playground to make sure everyone can have a successful experience for children aged 3 to 5? And I think you had the same question I did. Do these children have a sandbox? Is there a water spigot? Is there chalk?
There's 6 things apparently.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
a sandbox,
on the survey.
a swing, that survey. I'm sorry.
So
because I'm thinking, like, at our playground, the shade. How many kids are just in the shade, looking at the wood chips, the cool rock they found, all these things that I don't see it in the survey. And I'm like, that's what half the time is spent doing outside is like, look I found a little pebble.
Walking around with a bucket and picking up rocks and sticks and
worms.
Worms. I mean, the play isn't just sports. It's not focused on games or using the equipment.
Have you ever worked with a child that's focused on sports? I was so confused. That's where I was really like.
And the question you might ask is, who's your favorite ball player?
Because I'm thinking like, what's your favorite Tour de France team? Like you're riding a bike. So like, what's your, I'm just like, and do you like the, I don't even know what the terms are. The leader, the runner, whatever.
The leader runner.
Whatever.
I don't know either.
I did have one child that when I taught in New York City who could name the entire infield of the New York Yankees.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, I recently had a conversation with Dale. Oh, I froze. Can you see me? Okay. One thing I was thinking a lot about is the recent study in Tennessee where the longitudinal, growth for children who started a formal pre-K in ages 3 and 4, and then looking at them when they're in 3rd grade and 6th grade did not show favorable outcomes. In fact, I spoke with Dale Farran, the person who really conducted those studies, and she said that those children were actually having increased behavioral problems and decreased sort of educational outcomes later on. And she speculated that this whole thing about putting preschools in big schools where children are expected to stand in line, to not to talk during lunchtime, to line up to take their turn to get on the slide, this culture of, you know, I call it schoolification or whatever, that is not only proven to not help children in the long run, but it can be very damaging. And that's why I'm alarmed. And that's why I'm speaking out against recess mentality for young children, because we have to do things differently for our youngest kids. I would argue maybe we need to do it differently for the whole public school system.
Right.
But if we don't get it right at the start, as we're getting more funding for UPK, we have to see our unique identity as early childhood educators to do it differently. It can't be about standing in lines. It can't be about sitting in groups and holding bubbles in your mouth and compliance, because it's damaging. It's hurting children. It's causing them to shut down. I mean, when you read a lesson plan on safe and unsafe play behavior for a 3 and 4 or 5-year-old,
that's set up to take 40 minutes.
Oh my
the
gosh.
lesson plan, classroom 20 minutes, playground 20 minutes.
And so you imagine those kids wiggling and poking and the teacher saying,
needing to move. Yeah.
We're trying to get to this lesson on how to play, you know, and then maybe at the end of the lesson, I'll give you 10 minutes to practice playing. And while you're practicing playing, I'm going to keep checking for your knowledge and asking you, do you know how to play safely?
Yeah.
Like, this is not early childhood.
Right.
So I just ask young children, the magazine Young Children, I ask our researchers, I ask our leaders, what example are we giving? What are we holding up? And as we talk about guided play, as we talk about adult roles, as we talk about learning through play and playful learning, and all these terms that we're throwing around, what examples are we given that are back to your original quote, you know, that give
the hallelujah
joy,
kind of
the hallelujah, the joy, the agency, the autonomy, the love. Where's that?
Yeah. Well, and I realize that this article is written by therapists and not early educators, but the people reading the magazine, the people reading this journal are early childhood educators and professors and, you know, involved in policy somehow. And I don't know, if you haven't ever been presented another way of thinking about teaching young children, this all would really click and make sense. I was trying to imagine myself, you know, 25 years ago, reading this and how I would have responded. And I think I would have been really behind it, because at that point I was trying to be a teacher. I wasn't, you know, my identity was different back then. And so that's another reason I feel like there's a big responsibility for the people.
You should
make decisions about what to publish. Illuminating Care by Carol Garboden Murray. Yeah.
I don't know if you know it.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I might have 3 copies on the shelf over here because I keep loaning it out and circling it back around. And also I'm pretty mad that your book's not immediately available too, Mike, your new one. Because I want people to have that one too.
Well, I will say that Carol actually, like, I was just reading through it because I figured I should actually use my same terminology. And Carol like hit the 3 main points of chapter 1, you know, engagement, attunement, and I forgot the other one. Autonomy.
You didn't even write it.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, even as I look back on what I was writing, you know, my evolution has changed. Like even when I use the word independence and self-help skills, all those things, there are early childhood words, but now my ideas of those words are changing, right? Because we want, like, I love the word attunement. I think that's a great one, Mike.
Yeah. We have a responsibility, and anyone who's making publishing decisions has a responsibility to make sure that what's published is really in line with child development and brain development and what we know about children's real physical needs. Like, it can't just have this lens of school. And it makes me, it really, like, I'm swearing and I'm angry, but I cried a little bit when I read this the first time. It just really hurt my heart to think of, and I'm thinking of individual 3 to 5-year-olds that I know and have worked with being in this, having this expectation of compliance, and I'm going to read it to you and I'm going to tell it to you, and I'll maybe show you some pictures, but then I expect perfection once we get out there. And if you make that mistake, we told you, we've talked about this.
Right. And there's no respect for the body, right?
Yes.
Children's bodies, the whole standing on the swing, going up a slide.
Standing on the swing. That's the one I couldn't remember. Yeah.
It just yeah. And I feel like our field attracts either the people who were the child who would just follow those rules and can't wait to make other people do it. And there's those of, I'm assuming I'm looking at 2 right now, those of us who couldn't follow the rules. I remember I had an assessment in kindergarten. I don't know what they were trying to study, but my mom did show me years later of one of the things was jumps, and they just wrote refuses to. Why was somebody having I'm picturing somebody okay, now jump. Okay, yep. Jumped with 1 foot, jumped with 2 feet. It's what the hell, you know?
Honestly, I probably would have jumped but cried. If that was my assessment when I was
I would have cried too. I would have, why do you want me
to jump? I was jumping over there. Why do I have to jump for you here?
Yeah, well, I didn't speak at that point either. I was nonverbal, so I would have just scowled.
Yeah.
I think that also what was I going to say? This, we need to really think about why we're pushing back, because what happens is there becomes this divide, this big gap between people who talk about free play and guided play.
Yeah.
And I think that the terminology is important, but play is mysterious and elusive, and play is not always measurable. So I think that we need to find a way to, we who are advocates of children and free play and joy and autonomy are not saying that there isn't an adult role, and we're not saying that we don't sing songs and read stories to kids. Of course, those are adult guided activities, right? That we have adult directed ways of entering into a collaboration with children. But please understand that the reason we have such visceral reactions and push back against this kind of compliance-based teaching is because it does not feel like it respects the profession, the children, the educator. And so people will often say, well, what's the big deal? I mean, play is play, if you play sports, if you play a game, if you play free play, why are you making such a big deal about this? This is a playful learning article. But we have to suss this out. We really have to suss this out a little bit.
So sports, sorry.
I was just gonna say that's, Lisa Murphy has started to talk more about choice than play. Really focus things on, do the children have a choice?
Right.
Because play is so easy to argue with and sort of.
And it's so hard because we can't use the word guide, even though we're talking about an adult role, because then people, but I was just thinking, even the sports thing, physical education K through 12 spends so much time teaching kids sports, and the number of those kids who go on to play sports in adulthood is really tiny. And there's a separate movement, again, each field has these same splits. There's a separate physical education movement that's based on healthy lifestyle. What are things you like to do that get your body moving? And let's do that and learn to do it, and learn to know how that affects your heart rate, how that affects how you feel, how that affects you moving through the day. All of those things carry through adulthood. So even when we get into this play, play, because later they'll play baseball. And children, there's plenty of children who are motivated to play. I was one of those kids who kind of played because my older siblings did. And, but there's not motivation for everyone to do it. And even if there is in, younger ages, even if you're talking about that, because adults play and adults who don't play one, shouldn't be working in these programs, and two,
Yes.
should start playing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another thing. Like, even when you get into that argument, it falls flat. Like, no, our ultimate goal isn't to get kids to learn how to throw a ball to play catch, or to wait their turn to play catch, because only two people can do that. And now we have a ball. It just, just
Yeah.
hurts me.
I did start looking at some of the original research that talks about the play continuum or the play spectrum. I started looking at that, and there's some really broad conversation. It's talking about babies, it's talking about 7-year-olds, and it's talking about 11-year-olds. It's talking about phonemic awareness. It's talking about outcomes in understanding numeracy and mathematics. So, I mean, it's a huge, broad continuum, birth to age 11. So don't take those outcomes that we need guided experiences and direct experiences to have better outcomes. Don't take that little chunk of information and apply it to children ages 3, 4, and 5.
Right. And one person I talked to who was kind of part of creating that idea of the continuum, it was more about observing what adults do with kids. And like, oh yeah, sometimes there's these very, peekaboo or whatever.
Yes.
There's these games we play that are very adult, like the child isn't going to continue to do it if we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are these behaviors adults do to continue engagement, to increase engagement.
Mhm.
And if they're attuned, when the child's engaged and doesn't need the adult, without the adult, then the adult leaves the child. But if the child needs help kind of re-engaging, and this might happen more when you're like at the laundromat, you've got to be in this place for an hour.
Yeah.
Versus, if you're at home or whatever. Because one of my favorite things was just at a laundromat a few months ago, just watching this mom expertly kind of back off and then kind of engage and back off and engage. And finally, the person who worked at the laundromat like sat down with the kids, because there's one point when they did climb up on the washing machines, like the tall ones. And, she told them to get down, but then she like asked the mom if she could like sit down with them and have a snack. Because that's probably what they really need. And and I just heard her talk to them. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. I when I told you to get down, I was just worried about, it being safe, because there's not really anything soft down there. And but you actually remind me of my grandkids. My grandkids loved climbing. What do you like to do? And if you didn't have to be in here, what would you be doing instead? And it's just this great conversation. But the way that the mom would like, oh, here, like play with this, and then they'd play with a little while, and then they'd go off and do something on their own. And if they were engaged, she just left them.
Yeah.
When they started like, kind of being loud next to some people who clearly did not want the kids right in their space. Like, hey, you guys, why don't you bring that over here? And it was just so cool. And that's what the play continuum should describe, is how do adults engage with children by being attuned to them?
I love that.
Not let's choose a spot on the spectrum and just focus on that and do it.
Right.
So I think if it starts with attunement, we'd be fine.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that might be a good wind down spot. If we start with attunement, we'd be fine. Like if at any point in this article that kind of relationship building had been mentioned in any way other than a means for compliance, then this could have been a very different conversation.
Yeah. I'm going to think about attunement a lot. I think that's a great place. Like we do have to include ourselves. What is our role, right?
Yeah.
We are important. We make decisions that affect so many vulnerable children who don't have control over their schedule.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's so critical that we're in tune.
And in a group environment, if the child is seeming to want to play but doesn't know how to join the others, that's a really good role for us to be a little more involved, but it's all attunement.
Yeah. And so much of what they described in this as a misbehavior that they probably said challenging behaviors that we want to stop or reduce or whatever, just moving closer is almost always the answer. Like just if you feel like they're playing in an unsafe way or there's a conflict that you're concerned about, moving closer and coaching and guiding, there's your role. That's when you can be the teacher that you clearly want to be. I know we could probably keep on going and going and going, but I have an 11 o'clock. So
Thank you so
So
much.
we
All
have
right.
to wind this down. Thank you, Carol, for forcing me to read this article and
You're welcome.
have this conversation. And thanks, Mike, for joining in.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be a great, fun conversation. And also, I'm out of episodes, so thank you for getting me back on track. I've gone 2 weeks without releasing anything. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
And come back for another episode next week, probably next week. Bye, everyone.